Hello, BookTube. I thought I'd come to you with a video and I'd call it The Joys of Epistolary Novels. Now, I had recently just finished reading Dracula and a myriad of annotated editions. And as usual, YouTube is a mind reader, and it started popping up a lot of videos that were reviews of Dracula. The first one I watched, I was kind of appalled with. The person, I think, totally misunderstood what the story was about. But also, he really came down heavy on the epistolary novel style, saying it's stupid, it's boring, and all this stuff. And I go, whoa! You know, it's not. It's different, and it has a lot of joy to it. And I'll get to that joy in a little while. So yeah, I started looking at a few other videos about Dracula, and then just typed in epistolary novels and watched or sampled a few other videos. A lot of people are coming down and saying they didn't understand this style and they think it's boring again. So that seems to be a bit of a commonality. I guess there's a split between those. Now, and I'll use Dracula as an example. And it is an epistolary novel. And it's not just letters. There are documents. There are newspaper reports. There are audio recordings, phonograph recordings. There are telegrams. And then there's diary entries, as well as letters. Now, and these are all put together to create a cohesive story and a narrative. Now, a lot of novels are first person, third person, second person even, and sometimes they have an omniscient narrator who makes judgments and moral calls and sees everything and, you know, has all the dialogue and everything. And then you've got other ones that have unreliable narrators. But sometimes you're not sure with those, and those are interesting in themselves. But when you get an epistolary novel, you've got however many characters that are writing letters or documents or diary entries like in Dracula, and each one has their own style or should have their own style. So they're very different in style from the other one, letters as well. And that is a joy, I think. And it also creates something that it's very difficult, and I don't think can be done as well in a normal narrative story, second person, third person, and so forth. And that is sometimes a sense of ambiguity and contradiction, because in real life, you get three people that will describe, say, how a person looks. You'll get four different descriptions, or sometimes you get all the same. But when you get the different descriptions, it's interesting because it makes the reader aware that this is more, to me in a way, it's more in the real world. And you've got things that are shorthands between, if they're letters, between people. Or when they're writing a diary entry, they won't need to explain things because they know who this person is. Let's go back to Dracula for a minute. The Jonathan Harker's diary entries, which are originally done, we say, in shorthand to begin with. And he will at the beginning say, you know, note to self, basically, you know, get recipe for Mina. Okay, you know, this is sort of an outside. It's a bit of a digression, but it's a type of thing you would write down in a diary. But then who's Mina? He doesn't have to put down that Mina is, you know, right at the beginning. Mina is his fiance and he's going to marry her. He doesn't need to do that. But as the reader, You don't know who that is right at the beginning, and then you eventually find out who she is. So, and then we've got, as I say, we've got Dr. Seward, who records on phonograph his diaries. And Mina later, the character of Mina, keeps a diary as well, and she writes letters. Now, she transcribes all this and types everything out. So she transcribes the shorthand of Jonathan Harker's, transcribes the audio recordings, the phonographic recordings of Dr. Seward, and everything else, the newspaper articles that they get, the telegrams, everything else. And because not all characters write a diary entry or letters either. And this is where we get things in between letters, too, between two people. Again, you got this shorthand that sometimes there's going to be contradictions or ambiguities. You know, things aren't going to quite add up at times. Now, if that happens in a novel, it can and does, but there's got to be good reason for this and not just the fault of the writer who's screwed up. See, the thing is, when you're doing something, and if you're doing it well, like Dracula, the writer can screw up with dates and things, and it works because these are things that really happen, and that just expands the story and makes it, to me, more joy to read, because there will be times that in a diary entry, there may be something, or in this case, Mina is transcribing. She's not transcribing every single word. Potentially she is, but probably not. There's going to be things that are talked about that are totally irrelevant in lengths of time, like in big chunks that are not related to the story. So that won't be transcribed for the record. So there's going to be gaps, and there are gaps in here. And not every character keeps a diary. Van Helsing does near the end, but Lord Godalming, Arthur Holmwood, he does not. And Quincy Morris does not. But they are in there because their dialogue is written down by somebody else. Now, think of this. Their dialogue is written down by somebody else. Exactly that. Is it accurate? Is it accurate? And is Mina's transcribing of everything 100% accurate? So as a reader, you have to keep all these things going, and it to me, it makes it much more joyous to read things. And when you do see errors, you aren't sure, is it the author screwed up? Or is this purposely put in there to make it look more real? And especially the different styles of writing as well. That you're going to have different, and some of them are going to be very different in styles than the other person. And it's going to be jarring at times, but that's another part of the joy. And with a good writer, they put all this stuff together and they can create a fabulous narrative that will, enthrall the reader, which I believe Dracula does. Also to, other epistolary novels, one that I'm reading currently slowly, is Samuel Richardson's Clarissa, the granddaddy of all epistolary novels. And they're long letters at a time when letter writing was the thing, and there's a certain style, there's a format to follow, and the writing style, like, you got these long sentences that are beautiful writing, and it's very different than reading a normal novel with sort of shotgun dialogue that's almost like a script. This you get to immerse yourself in and sort of wallow in the language. And it's much slower as well. So I can understand, like, if you don't like that kind of thing, you may not. But if you give it time, I think there's a lot of joy that is taken away from this. And there's so many other epistolary novels. Like, it's just, I'm not going to sit here and list them off, because there are hundreds, if not thousands, and they're still being written today. I don't know how effective they are today, because nobody really writes letters anymore. I think you'd have to do emails and tweets and things like that, which is interesting, and I suppose it could work in the same way, because all those things that are intrinsic to something like Dracula, the ambiguity, the contradictions, are all still here, because you're using a record that may or may not be correct. And like in a normal standard narrative, you've got like an omniscient narrator that will proselytize, will philosophize and make judgments at times, or you have an unreliable narrator. But in each of these bits of letters and stuff, they could be unreliable. So this is the thing. So it's not an overarching thing that's unreliable, and that it's very intricate. And I just love this kind of writing as something different from the normal standard narrative of novels. So if it is something that you've sort of never really looked at before, or thought, I don't want to read letters, it can be extremely, extremely enjoyable. Just give it time, and even like, and just take it out of the fiction part, because what we're talking about is an epistolary novel. Just letters themselves can be gripping to read by certain people. Some people are just fabulous letter writers. That's another story, but because I'm here talking about epistolary novels. So, and you couldn't go any, worse. Uh, you know, well, you can't go bad or worse or whatever the saying is, for than to read Dracula and immerse yourself in the story and go along with it. But keep in mind all these things of how it's constructed, who's saying what, and things like that, where there's going to be inconsistencies, and there's going to be ambiguity, and that's the joy, or one of the many joys. Thank you, BookTube.